Okay. Good evening to all of you.
Yeah, Mr. Parmar, go ahead. We can hear you properly.
So I'll just share my screen and start my presentation for today. Before I start my presentation, let me take a moment to introduce myself. I am Aniruddha Parmar, Director Business Development at Spectrum PharmaTECH Consultants, India. Spectrum PharmaTECH Consultants India is into turnkey project solutions for pharmaceuticals, biopharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, APIs, and a host of domain into the pharma segment. We specialize into containment projects, sterile projects, and various all kinds of dosage form projects. The scope of services that we offer range from right from the conceptual design development right until the end of commissioning and qualification of your facilities. So with that as a background, I would like to pick up on the topic that we have selected for today, that is the containment strategies. Okay. So I'll take this forward. So the topics that I would cover in the presentation is introduction to the basically the high potent drugs, what they are, the containment definitions and the concepts, the design concepts, and Spectrum's experience in this specific domain. Basically, drug is classified as a high potent drug if its occupational exposure limit is less than 10 microgram per meter cube. So that's the category what we are looking at to look at as a high potent drug. And this majorly the high potent drugs comprise of the anti-cancer compounds. The occupational exposure limit is basically an upper limit on the acceptable concentration of hazardous substance in a workplace environment. So basically, if you expose more, the operator gets exposed more, he may develop other say symptoms or negative reactions to the drug that is under getting manufactured here. Now, prime requirement, as we know, of a high potent facility is in addition to the regular aspects of GMP, like prevention of cross contamination, protecting the drugs and efficacy. We are again challenged with making these drugs which do not impact the operators. So that's where the whole say high potent drug manufacturing and the concepts come into picture. This also, the other high potent drugs include drugs such as hormones, narcotics, and steroids, so various different things. And almost say 25% of the drugs worldwide are getting classified as a high potent drug, and more research is happening so that the drug dosage is minimized and the potency is more. So you don't say the developments are happening more in that area. The regulations for handling different toxic substances, this include like mainly the local EHS policies or the guidelines of the government where the facility is being set up. The corporate EHS policies of the company, how much the companies are strict about these things, how much the companies are taking care to protect their employees. That's one of the important factors these corporate EHS guidelines govern. Then the OSHA guidelines come into picture. NIOSH recommendations on different safe and effective handling of anti-neoplastic and other hazardous drugs. And German Hazardous Substances Act 2005. Then there are different classifications of the carcinogen and various OEL. So there are different regulations on carcinogens. Then there are the ACGIH ratings starting from A1 to A5, and then there are the IARC ratings. So there are different say ratings and category groups which are used to classify these drugs. Containment is typically a term used to providing engineering controls. So why do we need that? So as I said, like say we are looking at potent products. So very important is protection of the personnel from the product. So that has becomes one of the prime importance. Protection of environment from a product. So again, this is the surrounding environment as the potent product moves around, and then it may further contaminate people again coming into those contact. And then protection of product from personal environment, which is basically a GMP requirement. So in any kind of manufacturing of pharma, you intend to protect the product from personal and the environment. Now, containment, how potent compounds can enter human body and affect us. So this is where typically trying to look at the operators, how it can impact them. So the primary thing and the most that we try to conduct, say, control is ingestion through mouth and nose. So that's the primary method. Then through skin, transdermally, mechanical transfer, inhalation is again one of the very important factors. Then intravenous through accidental puncture and the cross contamination issue. So there are these are the different methods of say how the potent compounds can enter the human body. Now here, one point, like if you see, typically all of our calculations of containment and all are based on the fact, like say we are assuming 10 meter cube of air that we inhale per day. So there's a average what we consider, and then based on this, if you inhale so much, there's an operator exposure limit is set, which is say that's the maximum an operator can inhale. So it's an over a period of time, if you keep inhaling say quantities more than the OEL, then you are bound to get impact, and you develop certain other kinds of uh, diseases or other kinds of problems in your functioning. So that's where the uh, calculation is based on. The exposure of the operator could be a result of a direct contact with the process material during transfer. So typically, if you are using manual handling systems, manual material transfers, so the chances of impact could be the residuals or releases from mechanical and closed transfer systems during plant cleaning and maintenance operations. Now, this second point is one of the very critical points that needs to be looked at. Like say, typically, process material during transfer. So we go with say equipments. Nowadays, there are a lot of designs available on containment and closed transfer systems. However, a lot of them don't address how like say you build a box of isolate around a particular machine, and we call it like say it's a containment is happening. So well, it definitely addresses the containment during the operation time, but what about say when you undertake the plant cleaning, and how effectively can you do that? And at that time, if the design is not proper, it's not mechanically easily accessible, or IP systems cannot be effectively utilized, it can result to a lot of say exposure at the time of say plant cleaning and maintenance operation. So this second aspect is also one of the very important aspect that we need to look at when we are selecting the equipments and designing. The third definitely is accidental exposure. So there are different systems that we employ, how we need to address in case an accidental exposure has happened. For example, there's a crack in the glove box, or during transfer, some accident has happened. Some vials have toppled off, fallen onto the floor. So how to address those kind of accidental exposure? So definitely a system has to be in place. Now, the degree to which the the operators may be exposed to or harmed by this release of hazardous material during product handling depends on mainly four factors, we can say. That is the physical form of the material, the scale of operation, the hazardous properties of the material, and the methods used to handle the material. So all of it. So physical form, we come to it on the next slide. So it's like, for example, say if it's in liquid form, so actually there's no say exposure chance or how we do inhale that. So that risk of inhalation and those things drops. It's actually not there. When it comes to say powder form or say flakes or those forms, so the exposure and it can release dust in the environment which the operator can inhale. So the risk is definitely much more. Scale of operations, if you're handling few grams and all, definitely very less exposure potential is there. And what you when you handle on a large scale, so what happens, the operation time for when the operator is standing increases, so which actually leads to the say more exposure. You keep continuously inhaling the drug. Then comes the hazardous properties of the material, how hazard the product itself is by nature, and then the methods what you are using. So are we doing it manually or what kind of transfers you are using, and what kind of risk these methods inherently carry. So as we go ahead to develop a specific containment strategy or a design concept, so we start off looking at say how we need to go about. So first step is like quantify hazard with the substance being handled. So it is important that we identify how much is the OEL or the kind of what toxicity of the particular material what we are handling. So there are various guidelines which we can refer to if it is not known to the say customer or it's a new product. If it's an existing product, definitely there are material safety data sheets from which the limits can be taken up. Then we need to also look at the EHS policies of the customer, how they classify and what bands they classify. We come to the different bands as we go ahead in the presentation. Then different classification agencies, CGI, HARC, how they classify it. And then we need to arrive at a design OEL in consultation with client and sign off. So these design OELs are typically lesser or more stringent as compared to what is the operator's the basic OEL of the product itself. So if there's a particular limit, we try to be say look at it and design it more safer. So you can count it say much lower OEL and then you take it to develop the design. So that's what is typically the more safer approach. Second is you select the exposure potential. So there are main factors for selection of correct exposure potential are like say, as we discussed, like the material form. So dustiness potential. So liquids and all, definitely there's nothing, or semi-solids and these formats for the dustiness potential point of view. So more the containment strategies are working around the inhalation method. So exposure to the by way of inhalation. So because liquids and other exposures, typically you wear the gloves and there are say, so there won't be a direct contact possible, and more or less liquid handling is much simpler. There are say closed loops and systems there. So when we look at the powder material, then the dustiness potential comes into picture. Is it low, medium, or high? So typically, if it's a pellet kind of a thing, very specific structure, though it is in solid form, the potential is low. Then medium, if it is granular, or there's visible dust, or it settles quickly. Then very high potential of dust generation when you are handling light powder, so which can give to lead to dust cloud potential. Next is the duration of the task. If the task is lesser than 30 minutes or more than 30 minutes. So typically example wise, if you see your sampling or dispensing operations are classified as short-term tasks, whereas your compression activity. So the operator is observing a compression machine the tableting, and the processes last for 4 or 5 hours. So those are like say classified as long-term exposure. And then the scale of operations will come into picture. But like say, are you handling very small grams, kgs, or transferring hundreds, tens and hundreds of kilos? And then there are very large scale transfers of that. So the exposure potential, looking at the destination potential, the amounts to be handled, and the duration of the task. So we arrive at an exposure potential for the particular material being handled. And then there are different guidelines assigned to that. So it's like the protection level is one. So it's basically low exhaust ventilation. Uh, as you keep looking at further containment level, if you look at protection level 4, it rises up to isolator with negative pressure. So that's the whole range of say product exposures possible. And our typically the high potent products qualify under the protection level of 4. When we look at maximum of anti-cancer products or hormonal products, steroidal products, they qualify under the protection level 4. Now there are different requirements like your exhaust filters should be only through alpha filters. So it is ultra low particulate air, much more efficient or say much finer than your HEPA filter also. Then this, if we look at it, is basically the comparison how we band the say drugs on based on their OEL levels. So that's a OEL first. Let us see that. So that's an average airborne concentration of the medium microgram per meter cube to which exposition of the worker is happening over a period of time. Now various OELs of the products will come in and say where it settles. So we need to identify a band. So OEB bands, OEB1 is the most hazardous band, you can say. So the exposure levels are much lesser than, sorry, rather the OEB5. So it should be less than 1 microgram, and OEB4 is lesser. And then the bands keep increasing less and less for say high potency of the material. So the OEB1 is the most simplest or a regular drug. Going up to OEB3, few of the anti-cancer molecules fall in the OEB3 band, and some of the hormone products. Then OEB4, 5, mainly from the pharma parlance, the oncology drugs somewhere range in this OEB4 and 5. Most of the drugs range, and a few on the OEB3 banding. Now, we'll come to the say equipment sizing and the selection. So typically, why this? How would these bandings help out say to somebody who is setting up a company or a new factory? Now, typically, you can always say design for a higher OEB band, which will give you say flexibility. There's no harm in making an OEB3 level product in an OEB5 containment facility. So you can definitely do that. But with OEB5 band of say facility, your capital investments are higher, your operating expenses are higher on the overall running. So now, do you want to really over design your facility is a call that typically is always a point of discussion with various customers that we engage onto the project. So we try to look through the entire list of the say products that the customer envisages to make, and then we apply the containment strategy, band out different steps of manufacturing, and then we arrive at what is the OEB band. Like for typically, if you see for oncology now, suppose if you were to do group the entire list of products, so it may happen like your batch sizes come up to, like say if you are making an OSD facility, so it may come to kind of a 50 kg suits of for granulations, or maybe 80 kg suits of granulation. But if we were to try to look at segregation based on the OEB bands, it may turn out like few of the products are OEB3 band. So if you remove those products out of the thing, so if you make a design a suit which is OEB3, your majority of products have gone out, and then you're left with high potent, which will be a smaller equipment to be handled, say for smaller batch sizes. The designs can be with OEB 4 and 5 category of equipment selection. So likewise, the OEB selection or classification becomes a very important factor while sizing of the equipment, and it will have a long-term impact on your capital investment as well as your operating cost as we go ahead into the facility. So this is like something like hierarchy of control measures. So typically, uh, any kind of product, say even the high potent product. So the primary thing is you use a personal protective equipment. But is it the right way? It leads to a lot of operational requirements, operational safeties. You have containment, you have the contamination spreading throughout the rooms, and you are actually virtually making the whole facility say contaminated, and then the control becomes difficult. The next hierarchy of controls could be administrative control, like restricting the controls movement of people and material in and out of the high potent segment area where the high potent material is being handled. The third, which is the more effective method, what we try to rely out is on the engineering controls. So this is basically contained handling. So that is the whole objective of the containment strategy. The different hygienists who are operating in the pharma world and the biological world. So engineering controls is what we try to do that for a facility designer. Beyond this, reduction of the quantity below critical limits, substitution of the high potent material with less hazardous material or forms, or work with eliminate that at source. So we work with a non-potent material. So these are like beyond the purview of a facility designer of a pharma. So these are on the research background and how you develop these upcoming molecules or replace these molecules. So far as our purview of as a designer is concerned is right from whether we want to use a PPE or and up to what control engineering controls you can offer. Now, more or less use of PPEs is almost outdated in the current world. This is only in case you don't have any other options how to contain your process within available transfer systems or the isolator. So that's the last level of approach that you do. So the focus more will be uh, on the engineering controls aspect. Now these are different definitions what we use. The OEL, occupational exposure limits, short-term exposure limits, long-term exposure limits, acceptable daily intakes, occupational exposure bands. Few of them we saw on the chart. Then the time weighted averages, long-term time weighted average. So what is the impact if the operations are long? So that's a method to calculate out using uh, the long-term LTTWA. And then there is a short-term time weighted average. So these are for any operation is typically broken down into 15-minute time slots. And then the number of short-term time weighted averages taken by a particular operation is looked at, and we arrive at a solution. Then these are some of the various design concepts as we select a specific when we are looking to select a specific solution. So there are like typically an open transfer, open process. So you can still do this, but then you need to have a complete maximum PP. So the tie-vac suits and all. And as you can see in the indicative drawing, you need to have a PP gowning airlock to come into the area. And when you are exiting the area, you need to use mist shower, decontaminate yourselves, degown, and then get out of the area. So this is the very simpler method, but not advisable method. Then you try to do containment of the transfer systems, containment, partial containment of the where you are charging and discharging these operations. So the process gets isolated, but you still run the risk of some exposure. So you need to have some kind of PPE wearing is required.
Mr. Parmar.
And lastly is a completely isolated operation, which is the contained transport and then the contained process.
Mr. Parmar,
Yeah.
your time is already up.
So do I get a couple of minutes?
You are already over 5-6 minutes. Another company is waiting for their lecture.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So I'll need to close this. Huh? So I'll just say it's a very long topic to go through. So I'll just end by say there are say if you need more information or the right kind of solutions, do visit us. Say we have a lot of exposure in this specific domain from Glenmark, Torrent, Novast, Argentina, and say over like say 30 facilities we have designed in the high potent segment. So we would welcome say more questions coming in from the audience on that.